Hey, what's up guys? It's Seth from Workbench. Today we're going to explore creating an espresso rig for animating a pop-up book.
This week we're going to talk about creating a rig that lets you create a V-fold page that you would find in a pop-up book. This rig is a bit complex, but you only need to know Xpresso to do it. Let's get started. We're going to start with a simplified version to give you a good basis on how this works, and then there'll be more complicated versions for download on our site. So I basically created this rig in Xpresso, and it's all mapped to this one controller, and it basically can open and close. If you're familiar with pop-up books, this is called a V-fold. Essentially, it's attached at the bottom, and as one page closes, it forces the middle to fold into the book. Let me start by showing you the basics. So I started by creating two planes for the pages, and I named it left page, right page. Then I put each page in a cloth surface to add thickness, and then I made sure that its center point or axis is on the very edge so that it would rotate from the middle of the book. Then I created a null object as my controller. I went in and I created user data. You do that by going to user data, add user data. And then I created this one called open, and I made it a float slider. And I know that I'm only going to turn this 90 degrees. I went 0 to 90, and then I hit OK. So that gave me this slider right here, which at the moment is not doing anything because it's controlled by something else. So then I went and I created an Xpresso node. Here's the Xpresso node. Dragged this left side controller in here, and I mapped the user data output to a range mapper. And in this range mapper, I'm telling it that I'm doing 0 degrees to 90 and then 90 to 0. And I'm using this range mapper to flip my axis from 0 to 90 to 90 to 0. And then I'm pumping that back into the left side controller into its rotation. And then I'm outputting out of left side controller's rotation B. And then I'm pumping it to the left page, which is left main page, the main null of my entire stack. And then I added another range mapper that flips this from 0 to 90 to 0 to negative 90 for the other side. And that's right main page B. What we're doing is at 90, both pages are open. And at 0, both pages are closed. All right, so that's simple. Now comes a little more complicated part. So then I created, out of curves, this mountain. So I drew the basic shape flat with some curves, making sure that I had a point in the center. Then I broke it out into two objects, and then I bent them back. Then I put it into a null, and I made sure that the null's center point was in the back corner, and making sure that the null's orientation is flat to the page. So then I made an Xpresso node. And I'm calling this mountain 3 because my other setup was more complicated and I had more little mountains. But it's always good practice to name everything because even for me, it's named and I got really confused going back to it. I dragged in my left side controller because again, we're still using its rotation to drive everything. I created a range mapper, same as before. This one is important because this is the base of the entire effect and it's a little touchy. So you could certainly do this effect with bones and not have to figure out what the curve of the rotation is, but this is a little bit simpler, and in my testing I created one with bones which works fine. I just wanted something a little simpler so that I could add and remove stuff as I went. When you make something with bones, you have to bind it and also paint weights, and I didn't really want to have to do that for this particular setup. Here I have this range mapper, and then the range mapper goes from 0 to 90 and 0 to 90. So we're not actually using the range mapper for anything other than mapping this curve to the rotation. And this curve was me trial and error so that when the page comes together, so it seems like it's one object. Obviously, it's not one object, it's two, but that's the illusion anyway. So here's my range mapper and here's my curve. And then I'm mapping this curve to the rotation P of the null objects. And then I added a couple other things. I added this other controller here so that I could flip one side then the other, and I'll show you how that works. And I'm just doing it with one controller, so it actually rotates the main null 180 degrees, but currently it's not connected. Let me show you how that works. So I created this full controller in dead center, and in here I added a user data node that basically goes from -90 to 90, and its default value is 0. this is what it looks like. So it's a float slider, -90 to 90, and I have it set to the default value 0. So I named this closed left right. So then I went into Xpresso, I dragged full controller in, I dragged left side controller in, and I dragged full page. And full page is the main null that everything is parented to, and it's dead center of the spine of the book. So then I'm mapping this close to the rotation B on the full controller. And I'm also passing that same value to the full page, which is this center point here. And then I've got a range mapper to map those values to the left side controller. And if we go in here, you can see the range mapper is set to -90 and 90. So it's doing that full value. And then I'm outputting to the left side controller 0 to 90. Remember, the left side controller only wants 0 to 90. So those are the values that it's expecting. And then I created a curve that essentially starts at 0, goes to 90, and then goes back to 0. So you can see, so if I go to +90, the book is closed on the right hand side. I go to 0, book is open completely flat. And then I go to -90, and the book is closed on the left. That's why this curve is like this. On top of that, I added some bends so that the paper would have some bend to it. Although in a real book, they would be hard pages, because at least the pop-up books that I have here in the house, they're kids' books and they have hard pages. But I think it looks nicer if we add a little bend to it. So I created 2 bends, one on each side, just to bend the edge of the page. And then in my full controller here in the Xpresso node, I created 2 range mappers. And I'll show you how these work. So I created one range mapper that goes 0 to 90, which is what the values I'm giving it. And those values are getting converted from 60 to 0. And then I created a curve that basically starts at 0, goes down to 60, hangs out at 60, and then goes back up to 0. And this is why you have to name things, because I don't know what side this is, but I named the other one, thankfully. So this side is my right bend, and I'm going to change the name right now. r.bend, and show you how this one works. The right side, and you'll only see the bend when it's coming this way. So you can see when it gets to about 35 or so degrees, 25 degrees, it starts to bend. Starts to give you that nice little curl. And then as it gets back down, it lays down flat. And then you can see on the other side, you can see that as left bend goes up, page lifts up a little bit from the person lifting the page, and then it bends back. Then it bends back and lays down flat. So that curve you can see is going to be a little bit different. And that's because the animation I wanted was a little bit different. And you can see where the other one only bends back, this one I wanted to lift up and then bend back. So I lift it up so it curls a little bit, and then I bend it back all the way, and then I lay it down. And this is starting at 0, going down to 60, hanging out at 60, and then coming right back up to 0, going past 0 into the negative, and then coming back down to 0. That's about it. So if you like this video, don't forget to subscribe. We do a video every week. If you have any questions or comments, leave in the comments down below. If you'd like to help support what we do, go to patreon.com/workbench and check out the blog at workbench.tv. I'm Sev, and we'll catch you next week.